Alright YouTube, it's time for the Occult Video 73 Hollow Earth and Flat Earth theories. Now, I'll preface this by saying I do not believe the Earth's flat, fairly obviously. I look at other celestial bodies, I see the curvature there as light moves across them. I say, it doesn't make that much sense that all other celestial bodies in the universe would simply be, they're flat but they're also facing Earth and they show curvature. You know, they're like dome-shaped or something. It just doesn't make too much sense to me, so I'll say that much. I do not believe in the hollow earth theory as far as sort of the Agartha legends of literally the earth is a hollow sphere with another sphere inside of it that's like glowing like a miniature sun, because I don't see any physical process by which that could take place. But I do believe in one thing here, and there's a link in the description to an extremely good compilation of literature by Alan Walton from Brantonia. He's compiled together hundreds and hundreds of little stories from all over the world, really, about caves, about hollow places in the earth, tunnels. This goes into one part government conspiracies. You know, oh, they're building tunnels and all these cave systems. They got like cities down there and everything. UFOs, specifically UFOs as they would use like caves or whatever as docking bays. Cryptids. Most of these are rural. They're remote locations. Some, though, are urban. They talk about one like elevator shaft. People were seeing like weird hairy creatures down there. The shaft punctured some sort of cave in literal New York City, and there were like troglodytes down there and stuff. If you're into any permutation of cryptids, UFOs, whatever, get out. I've got it for free on there. No plagiarism intended. I haven't altered it. I'm simply offering a text that he himself was offering for free anyway, in a different form. I put it into a PDF. Originally, you had to download like separate Word files. I think it's a little bit easier to use in this form. That being said, you can go to Brantonia and you can get this, and you can also get it's an Angel Fire site. It's a really primitive, old hosting, sort of free website, but it's very good. Everything on there is interesting, even if I don't agree with it all. That's probably the best text on the subject that's ever been compiled together from, again, newspaper snippets, anecdotal tales, things like that. Very, very good work. I strongly recommend it. It's the most popular download from the Occult Archive for a reason. It's very compelling. Some of these stories are weirder than others. Some are more, you can rationalize them. Some of them, though, really, really out there, gets into sort of cultish phenomenon. I do believe, however, that a significant proportion of all subterranean regions in the world have not been explored. I'm not just talking about large cave systems where they haven't fully fathomed them because they don't have the equipment to actually go deep enough. I'm talking about cave systems that almost certainly exist deep within our crust all over the place and simply haven't been explored at all. That is, no specific opening to these systems has been found. I'm sure that at least some of these systems do have sort of the buried treasure, or people tried to start like some sort of settlement and then they get suffocated or got killed by rabies from bats or something. I'm sure that there's all sorts of weird stuff in subterranean locations. It's sort of like the ocean. On land, it's difficult because we've already fathomed and explored most of the Earth's surface as far as land goes. You have to go into the deep reaches of the Amazon basin, the Gobi Desert, maybe some parts of the more remote areas of the Pacific Northwest, certain like rocky crags on some of these volcanic islands. You have to go to some pretty remote locations, northern Siberia, in order to find areas that have been not quite fully explored and documented to any real great degree. But below water, and in the subterranean places of the Earth, it's a free-for-all. Most of it hasn't been particularly well explored. Even, they still find shipwrecks they didn't know of in the Mediterranean, which is a relatively, compared to the Atlantic or the Pacific certainly, it's not as deep and it's nowhere near as large an actual area as something like trying to explore the deep ocean trenches of the Atlantic or the vast reaches of the largely wide open Pacific. You've got phenomena there that aren't documented as easily because most of the people exploring, they're just passing through on a ship or a plane or whatever. The plane's high up in the sky, the ship only has a limited amount of visibility, can only do so much. You've got all sorts of shipwrecks, pirate treasure, I'm sure it is down there. Loads and loads, thousands and thousands of tons of gold lie sunken in ships on the bottom of the ocean. Half of them, they probably can't recover it with today's technology, even if they found such wrecks. Look at the Titanic or something. Difficult to explore that too. They were talking about like dredging up part of the hull with enormous balloons, and I think they gave up the idea because like, oh, it'll probably fall apart anyway, number one. Number two, we don't have the money to do this. It'd just be too expensive. Even though it would be funny if they lifted up the entire Titanic and put it on display. That'd be pretty fun. I say leave it in the ocean as a shipwreck. It adds to the romanticism of the tale. In subterranean places, though, it's probably the only thing more remote to us than the deep sea areas. That is, that we don't even necessarily know where most of the caves, from small to enormous cavern systems, are in this world. There probably are, by the way. There are all sorts of tunnels, like mining expeditions. They went out, they tunneled around, nobody knows where the tunnel is, it's in some remote location, or they certainly didn't tell anybody what they were doing because they thought they had found the lost Dutchman's mine, and they weren't about to tell anybody where they were going. They didn't want somebody else to come kill them and take the gold. All sorts of stuff is there. You'd probably find all sorts of old exploration equipment dating back, in the 1700s and stuff. It's not even just modernity that we're talking about, spelunking and things like that. Not necessarily for recreational purposes. You think, in times of war and stress, people have a tendency to dig underground. The Nazis did a lot of that. And even half of those bunkers and tunnel systems haven't been completely mapped out yet. They found like an old Nazi train over in Poland, I think last year. They were talking about, oh yeah, we found a train in some of these tunnels. They had never seen it before. That's because there are so few people that have the green light to go exploring these things anyway. You would think of cave systems, they're basically the same, only nature has made them, largely. I'm sure there are all sorts of weird things down there, species that haven't been discovered yet. You would expect, you'd find, if you were able to actually fathom all of the cavern systems, I'm sure that you would find some that rival the Mammoth Caves. I'm sure that you'd find some that are larger than some of the largest systems that have ever been discovered. You'd think this Earth is a dynamic place. These systems are being created constantly all the time. What starts out as a little crevice in the rock somewhere filling with water, 100,000 years from now might be a considerable cavern, and a couple million years from now might be a whole system of caverns. They're being generated all the time, and sometimes we find species down there that aren't like the ones we've got up here. It's perfectly plausible to say there could be, I don't believe in like troglodytes, like humanoid, pale skin, sort of the descent sort of creatures living in the deep places of the Earth. But certainly those would be a climactically controlled area where a species that is only on the surface to hunt and is nocturnal, like Bigfoot or something, could take shelter during colder months or something like that. If you assume these systems are considerable in size, there could be multiple openings all over the place. This is one of the things behind sort of the missing 411, sort of the idea of like Bigfoot, Sasquatch up in the Pacific Northwest. I don't believe in an Agarthan and hollow Earth. And I don't believe that the Earth is flat. I think that ship sailed a long time ago. Now it's just it's not plausible. It wouldn't make physical sense. But the idea that the Earth has a lot more hollow places, caverns, tunnels, and so forth, that man has not yet been privy to, for the most part, it makes perfect sense. In fact, it would be almost nonsensical to say that they don't exist. To say, oh yeah, we've explored every cave, we've explored every tunnel, we know where they all are. I don't think so. I think we have a very little understanding of what's going on beneath the very shallow surface of our Earth, perhaps less of an idea than what happens in the ocean. And if you assume that some zone like the deep ocean that formerly was considered, well, there's not much going on down there. There's some worms around these deep sea vents, and that's basically maybe some crabs, some weird fish. We now know, of course, that's not the case. There are all sorts of weird species. We know giant squid do exist. Is it really that strange to consider the possibility that there might be like a 10,000-pound chunk of fungus growing in some cave somewhere, where it's just getting constantly washed in mineral-rich water, and it just sort of sits there decomposing the rock around it? Is it really that strange to think that evolution might have taken it in that direction? I don't think so. I think it's plausible. Not necessarily certain, but it's certainly a plausible argument. Or that there could be species in some of these very remote areas that are incapable of escaping from that remoteness, have been bottlenecked, have persisted for hundreds of thousands or millions of years, and that haven't been quantified yet because of their remoteness. You think, what if there's a cave out there somewhere in the Gobi Desert or below the surface of the Sahara, some huge cavern that used to be under an ocean? which is still fairly fertile and was once somewhat exposed, that's full of creatures that haven't seen daylight in the last couple million years or something like that. I think it's plausible. I think it's certainly a possibility. I shelve this with the occult because it's also related to the paranormal. Because of sort of Alan Walton's compendium and materials like that, it does tie in. It does tie in with UFOs, the cosmic forces, Agartha, all of these sort of legends from the East, Hinduism, and so forth. People have spoken about weird caverns. You look at the Mayans; they had like those the caverns that represented death, and initiates would have to wander through them. They had like a jaguar pit or leopard pit or something, and they had razor sharp stalactites, and there were bones everywhere that were calcified and covered in crystals. And now they think they've found the actual cave that they were talking about as a real physical location. That is, their spiritual texts had always spoken of this weird place. People said, well, that's a myth. This is their conception of the afterlife. Turns out it was actually like a real temple complex or something for initiation rituals. It's actually real. It does exist. It's literally physically there, and they always thought it was a myth. I think that we could look into some of these mythologies, talk about what they're saying might have existed at one time within the deep places of the earth, and if we look hard enough, we might see that some of these things, in fact, were physically true, more or less. There might be some embellishment. Oh, this place is prowled by ghosts and evil witches. Well, maybe not, but the physical location might actually be there. In Caribbean archaeology, we were told that a great many relics, especially from ages where most of the goods that were made were organic and thus prone to rotting, especially in a tropical climate, that a large repository of those goods, you can only really find them, dig them out in caves. They've been covered with sediment. They've been protected somewhat from the climate. They've been protected from erosion. They've been sort of preserved there. And that's the best place to look for some of these sherds, human remains, some of their tools, and so forth, that you won't find. You're not going to find them laying on the beach. It would have been destroyed by now. It's an excellent repository for human knowledge, caves and tunnels and so forth. They're sort of these forsaken, stagnating locations. And that's not always a bad thing from the perspective, certainly, of science, of archaeology, let alone the occult, you'd think. Could be some witch cult that inhabited a cave 500 years ago, and there's like a whole trove of weird manuscripts and ritual tools lying in some cave somewhere in France or Germany that just, they covered it up and nobody's found it yet. And it's still there, perfectly preserved, just as it was laid there hundreds of years ago. These things are out there. They do certainly, I think, exist. It would be beyond comprehension to say that a few of these caches of material aren't out there. I just hope that they dig up some Nazi bunker in Argentina or southern Brazil or something and find that it's full of Tula Society literature so they can finally replicate that material. That's about all. Peace out.